I'm technically Reverend Johnnie Jae, but I'm a heathen, so.
The founder of a tribe called Geek, a founding board member of Not Your Mascots, a journalist, and a Native American activist. She is the embodiment of her ancestors' dreams. A proud native of the Otoe-Missouria and Choctaw tribes, I am totally humbled to have on today's Big Dog, Little Dog, Brown Ball of Fury, better known as Johnnie Jae. Johnnie, how are you?
Well, I'm doing pretty good.
Right. And before we jump in, I do want to remind everybody to make sure you click the like button, subscribe, share, comment, and we're going to have a lot to dive into today with you. And you say you're doing pretty well. And I think that's such a loaded question right now with everything going on in the world with COVID. How are you coping? How are you coping through COVID?
Well, let me tell you, it's been really tough. The Native American community has been getting hit really hard. And, my uncle just passed away um, about a week and a half ago and from COVID. And both him and my aunt both had COVID. And she was 37 days intubated before she was able to recover. My uncle had been fighting COVID for 65 days before he passed away. And, yesterday my sister just texted me and told me that my niece, Emma, is going to be tested for COVID. So it's something that's really hit my family hard. And, just seeing how it's hit the Native community, and we don't have access to the resources that we need to really protect our people and keep us well. It's something that's really hard for me to reconcile with right now. Especially because it's hitting my family, and I think of my little niece. And I know kids tend to be faring pretty well, but they also tend to develop Kawasaki disease as a result of COVID. And that's something scary for me to think about. But I think I'm really coping with just having my online community, and having people to turn to talk to that are going through the same thing, because so many natives that I know are just terrified. They're angry because we don't have the resources we need.
Tell me about brown ball of fury. What does that mean? Where did you get that moniker?
Well, I've always been very argumentative, and I was on the debate team, and my mom used to get mad at me and tell me, if you want to argue so much, go argue in front of the mirror. And I was just always finding things to argue about. And then a movie called Brother Bear came out. And there was a scene where the little bear was trying to be all tough with the big bear. And he was like, "You're a little brown ball of fury." And so my mom started calling me that. And it kind of stuck. And it was something that was just between family. And then one of the very first interviews that I did for Native Max magazine, when we first started, it was with powwows.com. And we were just talking, and she was asking, do you have any nicknames? And I was telling her about Little Brown Ball of Fury. And, she got a good laugh out of that. And when the interview came out, that was actually the headline that she used.
Brown Ball of Fury.
Here's the Brown Ball of Fury, Johnnie Jae. And it kind of stuck.
So I'm going to need the Brown Ball of Fury to talk about what's going on as far as the move to change mascots in NFL and NHL and across other leagues, because several of these teams have racial slurs as their names. I want to start with the Redskins. The NFL's Washington Redskins announced last Friday that they are reviewing changing their name. At the time that you and I are filming, there's no concrete information on what that review entails. We don't know how much progress they've made. We just know they're reviewing changing their name. We do know that retailers like Target and Walmart have pulled from their shelves Redskins merchandise. You, Johnnie, you're a founding board member of Not Your Mascots, which is a nonprofit dedicated to educating about the harm that Native mascots have on Native children. There is so much to unpack here. Let's start with the slur Redskins. Where does that come from? What does it mean?
Well, it came at a time when people were still trying to figure out and identify and communicate with Native people. And the beginning of it was with the tribe on the East Coast. And, I'm not really sure about the exact history of it and how it came about, but like one of the colonists were like, oh, they paint their skins red. So then they started calling natives Redskins because their skin was painted red. Um, but as time went on and this term kind of became part of like the American vocabulary, it didn't stay benign very long like that. It wasn't just, oh, like an identifying moniker. It
Mhm.
became something more sinister because when there was a time when the US would put bounties on the heads of natives. So if you can make a pretty decent living killing native people, and when you would see these bounties put in newspapers, it just became something very sinister. Like, and it was also because you know how I would say white women tend to pearl clutch a lot when something isn't unsavory.
Mhm.
So instead of, saying, we're going to put 5 cents for a native head or hand or whatever, they were complaining that it seemed cruel. And so it seemed more acceptable for them to say redskin instead of
Mm.
Indian. And, because it seemed like just any other animal skin that they could, hunt and sell. And they used to do that with native skin. They used to not just put a bounty on our lives, but they would actually take our scalps, they would mutilate our bodies, and they would sell them like they would animal skins. And women, they would mutilate us horribly, and they would actually sell the vaginas, they would cut everything off and they would sell them and use them as pouches. And, it was a very, very disturbing time. And even now, just like learning about that history and learning about how that term redskin came to be, it amazes me that there's such a disassociation with how harmful
Yeah.
that term is. And it became something more too, because it wasn't just this kind of hiding something that was evil. It actually became a slur. Like it became an insult. They would use it as an insult. And, a lot of people don't realize this history because we're not taught this history. We're not taught about Native people. Like when you go to school, you get maybe a month during November where they'll maybe touch on the five
Right.
civilized tribes. If you're taking history, you probably have one little section, and again, just touches on the five civilized tribes, but nothing about the whole scope of our history, and
Yes.
definitely not the real story of how America came to be.
And to your point, Johnny, about what we do or don't get when it comes to Native American culture, I think one of the first introductions that I got to Native American culture back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was in school, elementary school, was November, Thanksgiving, pilgrims, Indians, and then some kids in the class would dress up as pilgrims, and then some kids would dress up as Indians. And that is the first impression that a 7 or an 8-year-old gets of indigenous people, and it's a caricature. And then after that, besides, oh, Thanksgiving, we're sharing food because, your land is being stolen. There's not a lot of context past that unless you are intentional about learning. So the word Redskins undeniably evokes negative emotions.
Absolutely. And it's funny too, because, so many people have come out of the woodworks, especially now, we're less than 2% of the population is Native people. And yet every time this issue comes up, I'm always amazed that so many, but I'm Native and I'm not offended. And you're like, mm, okay. And it comes back to the Washington Post did a poll and was asking people, are you offended by the term Redskins? And the poll came back that 91% of Native Americans were okay. Like they didn't have a problem with this. But what people didn't realize is the poll didn't actually ask Native Americans. And they only asked 500 and I think 4 people altogether, and they were self-identified. But they took the results of this poll and they really ran with it as saying, okay, well, Native Americans are cool with this. And I actually wrote an article about that poll, because every time people do a poll, you're basically leaving our humanity and our human rights up to the public opinion.
Mhm.
And nobody's human rights or their existence should hinge on what the general public, their opinion on whether or not they deserve to exist or they deserve to have human rights. Like, it just shouldn't be that way at all.
Dan Snyder, he is the owner of the Washington Redskins. About 6 years ago, and I'm paraphrasing, he said that the issue is not the term Redskins. The issue is all the things that are going on in the Native American community. It made me think of how people say about the Black community, oh, police brutality is not the issue. The issue is what's going on in Chicago. Do you think that those issues are twofold? Can you be upset about the Redskins slur as a team name and also be concerned about what's going on in the Native communities?
Absolutely, because what they failed to really realize is that it's not one or the other. They all intersect into each other. And, the dehumanization and stereotypes that come about because of Native mascots, and even being able to use a racial slur to Native people and profit from it, that impacts the way that others view and treat and even feel about our issues and our existence. And it's always a funny question, because I'm just like, here's the real truth. It's true that Native mascots are the lowest hanging fruit on the whole scope of the issues that we have to face. But look how hard we have to fight to just address Native mascots. It's the simplest, easiest thing that people could do to help Native people is just to eliminate the use of race-based mascots, to
I have a
stop
question,
using.
Johnny. I have a
Uh-huh.
question. Is there ever an appropriate time to have a Native mascot? Do you ever look at any mascot, whether it's the Braves or the Cleveland Indians or the Kansas City Chiefs, and say, I'm okay with that? Or is it never okay?
I am in the opinion of, in a perfect world where we had comprehensive Native American history and people actually recognized and acknowledged our humanity and our existence and our human rights, then I don't think there should be a problem with Native mascots. But we don't live in that perfect world. And so even for Native schools that, use the terms like warriors or have the Indians or the Braves, it's always hard to it's hard to kind of reconcile with that too, because Native schools, they treat the mascots very differently. It's just a mascot. It's not part of their identity at all. It's just something that's there, and they don't put too much stress on it being as part, like, they don't really take it in as part of their identity.
Mm-hmm.
And they treat it very differently. You don't see people in headdresses, you don't see them doing the war whoops, you don't see them doing any mockery of Native people. But when you deal with schools that have Native mascots, that's just part of their culture. It's mocking Native identities, it's mocking Native histories. And you see it all the time. You see banners from rival schools saying, oh, send them back on the Trail of Tears. And you see this on a collegiate level, even. And so there's not an understanding of that history. And even if the Native schools have these mascots and they use these names, it's fine for them, but they also have no control over how other schools act
Mm-hmm.
and how they respond to those Native mascots. And studies have shown that, it doesn't just have a negative impact on Native youth, but also on non-Native youth, because it really gives them a negative connotation towards Native people. Even if, they're like, oh, but it's a status of pride. It's, we're honoring you. But that's not exactly the impact that it has in the way that youth view other Native people.
I
And
think obviously as a non-native, um, because we don't have a lot of context about the history, the long history, the violent history of colonizers on indigenous people, we fail to appreciate the struggle. And we look at natives as the Florida State Seminole mascot as barbaric and as tough, and not as a nuanced human being. And so for you, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. You are saying that if we had broader context, if we had a better I can't talk, if we had a better education system that made sure we all knew about the many layers of indigenous people, you would be okay with a Florida State Seminole, a Kansas City Chief, but not a Redskin, I'm assuming.
yeah, not a Redskin, but it goes back to just, we don't have that understanding or respect for one another as people. And, if that was there, then, I absolutely think that race-based mascots could exist. Very weird to me, too, just how much non-natives take mascots on as their identity. There was an article not too long ago about a school that is looking into changing the name. And they were interviewing people in the town. And it was so bizarre to me because there was a 75-year-old man who was saying, "This is part of my identity. This is my culture." And I'm like, "You're how old? And a high school mascot is the center of your identity?" And it was so bizarre to me because it wasn't just the way that he was taking it on, but the way that the whole community was, to the point that they were actually having prayer services to pray to keep the mascot. And one of the ministers was saying, he has to console people because they're so afraid of losing this part of their heritage. And I'm like, a high school mascot. Like, if you guys were the Tigers, would you be fighting this hard if you were being asked to change the mascot to a bear? Because
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that people are so emotionally attached to the caricatures of native mascots to the point of petitioning and fighting and having citywide council meetings? Like, what is that about?
I think it's because, it makes people very uncomfortable to have to confront the reality that they are capable of racism, that they are capable of engaging in harmful behaviors, especially when they've been brought up to believe that it's not racist. And that's the hard truth that we have to face in America. Racism has been so normalized that it's basically invisible to a lot of people, and they don't understand that, there's a lot of behaviors, there's a lot of words and stereotypes that are racist. We've been able to use social media to mobilize communities, to mobilize rallies, to really put together education regarding these issues. And it's harder for people to ignore us. But because we're not being ignored now, it makes people angry.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want to believe that, oh no, it can't be racist. I'm not a racist. I'm not a bad person. So, this mascot isn't racist. So I think they try to double down and they try to, no, this is honor. This is how we honor you. And this is, we think you're awesome. We love Native people. But, that's not the actual reality of the behaviors that they're engaging in when they throw on a headdress, when they do the war whoops, when they do that tomahawk chop, or when they're telling people that we're going to send this school or this mascot back on a trail of tears, because that was a horrible part of our history. And we still have relatives that are still healing from that. Like,
Right.
that still impacts us as Native people today.
I like to say, especially when it comes to marginalized cultures, that people love to celebrate us. That you want to steal little things, you want to steal our culture, our food, our style, but you don't want to be there with us when it comes time to talk about what really makes us us, the sadness, the struggle. So to your point about people wanting to say, "Oh, my mascot celebrates you," but does it really? And if you think that it does, right, if you think that it does, what are you doing to help prop up Indigenous people as they experience the struggles that still affect them adversely today? Like, so you can't be at the football field on Friday night doing the tomahawk chop, but then you're not doing anything to give back to the Native community. That's completely hypocritical.
Exactly. We always say everybody wants to be Indian until it's time to be Indian.
Girl, right, right. And listen, I grew up in Georgia as a Braves fan. Tomahawk chopping at games. It's such a part of our culture. And I see oftentimes people on my Twitter timeline who are from Georgia or who are Braves fans doubling down, as you've said, saying, "I'm gonna tomahawk chop till I die. I don't care, what happens to the name." And I think it's really sad that we do that. But I have an interesting question for you. When you see when you see people dressed up in the headdresses and doing, is it called a war whoop? Is that what it's called?
Whoop, whoop.
The war whoop. Are you less offended if people who are doing it are Latinx?
No.
Okay.
And it depends. It really depends. Because war bonnets, headdresses, different, that's not something that's just for Native cultures here in the US. Other indigenous people south of the border, even in Africa, they have elaborate headdresses and war bonnets as well. So it's so easy for a lot of people to see it and be like, oh, that's a Native thing. I don't think that's right. But you also have to look at that individual's history. Like, what culture are they trying to represent through that headdress? Because not every tribe is like our tribe,
Mm-hmm.
where war bonnets are something that are considered sacred, something that have to be earned, and, that aren't worn by certain people. Like, you have to earn the right to wear that.
We all agree, well, most intelligent, empathetic people will agree that the Redskins need to change their name. The Braves, Atlanta Braves, do they need to change their name?
Yes.
Okay.
and that's kind of hard for me because I grew up a Braves fan. My grandpa was a Braves fan. That was our team. But honestly, it wasn't the name that made us love the team. It was the game. It was the players. It was the beauty of the sport. And the beauty of the game is just, I don't know. Like, I mean, I grew up watching the Braves and watching baseball with my grandpa, and those are the memories that I have. It has nothing to do with the name itself, but the team and what they were able to accomplish as a team,
Right.
and to learn enough that their behavior is harmful. So, I think they do need to change the name as well. And it's kind of amazing because this whole discussion, the changes that have come about in this issue in particular, um, it takes me back to when George Floyd's little girl said, "Daddy changed the world."
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
it really hits me harder now, just because, like, you look at how many issues are being taken up right now. People are starting to examine how they're contributing to racism,
Yeah.
how they're embodying it, how they're engaging in these behaviors. And, because the mascot thing, it hasn't gotten that much attention. We always have people working on the issue, but it hasn't been in the headlines. It hasn't dominated news. And, there hasn't been a lot of pressure, lately. Like, we haven't been doing rallies as much because of COVID. So
Mm-hmm.
for this issue to come out of nowhere to where it's a possibility that the Redskins are going to change their name, that's incredible.
Well,
And it
especially now that major money is being involved, because I believe FedEx has threatened to discontinue its sponsorship of the field where the Redskins play if they don't make major moves. So you're right. They're like
and
what
that
it's
was
at the
huge.
forefront.
Yeah, that was huge in itself because the CEO of FedEx is actually one of the minority owners of the Redskins. So for them to come out and make a statement that, we think they need to change the name, that is huge. And then to see, the Indians coming out and like, oh, we're going to review our team name too. And they've already done a lot of work. Like, they've been phasing out Chief Wahoo, which is amazing. But it hasn't changed the behavior of the fans.
It
Um,
hasn't. And on its face, I mean, just for the layperson, Chief Wahoo looked like the equivalent of what I would call a blackface for,
the Black Sambo.
that's what he looked like. And I just got chills, but it was only 2 years ago that the Indians phased it out. And when I look back at it, I look at it and think to myself, how could you not see this is a Black Sambo native caricature?
Hmm. Yeah, and so there's a lot of changes that are going on, and like, it makes me happy because it's like it takes a lot of labor off of us, because we've had to do so much work. We had to push back so hard, and this is an issue. In the big scope of things, it doesn't seem like it's a huge issue, but we have to fight so hard. And it's not just that we have to fight so hard to get progress, but it's also the backlash that we face for it. The mascot issue is, people tell us it's just a mascot, it's just a caricature, it's just a name, but they don't see the backlash that we face. Like, we get literal death threats, graphic death threats, from people who want to keep the name. And it's like, if it's just a mascot, then why are you threatening to kill me?
But we've talked a lot about how indigenous people are portrayed negatively when it comes to barbaric mascots. What heroes do indigenous people have in the media currently? Who's your hero politician? Who is your super sleek, sexy Hollywood celebrity? Who is your hero scientist? Who do native kids and grown-ups look up to and say, this is what I can be, this is who and what I can aspire to be as a native in my own country?
We have so many people. And that was kind of the reason I started a tribe called Geek, was because there's so many people that are doing incredible work that are moving Native people forward in ways that I couldn't even imagine. And they're not getting they're not being represented. Those contributions aren't being recognized. And I'm a tech and geek girl.
Mm-hmm.
So, I started a tribe called Geek so that I could focus on highlighting natives in STEM and geek culture, because that's my area of expertise. So, we have Aaron Yazzie, who has native hardware. There's Navajo hardware on Mars right now, because he designed one of the elements for the Mars rover. And he works on the Mars rover team. He works at JPL, and he is absolutely amazing. And there's so many other natives. My friend Erin, she works at SpaceX, and she's working on their Mars program. She's a software engineer. And it's amazing to see natives who are literally taking us to new worlds.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to hear that, because as you and I discussed previously, and then as you just mentioned again, we don't see native representation across mainstream media. When I was growing up, my mom and my sister and I would watch pageants. And if a Black woman didn't make the top 10 in Miss America, Miss USA, Miss Universe, we would have to change the channel, because my mom did not want us to grow up um, consuming media that didn't show someone who looked like me being able, positively achieving her dreams. And when I watch television now, I can't say that I see these people that you're talking about. They exist, but I don't know their names.
Yeah, we don't. And I grew up like that too. Like, I didn't see people in fields that I was interested in. Like, I wanted to be an epidemiologist when I was younger, and I didn't know there were native scientists. Like, everybody
Mm.
was like, well, I don't know any native who's actually doing that. But I attended a program called Native Americans in Biological Sciences. And so I got to spend a whole summer working with native scientists, natives who were in biology, who had doctorate degrees. And it was the first time that I saw that that was possible for me, like to
Mm.
be a scientist, to have a doctorate. It's like, oh, wow, like this is a reality. And so I'm
Is your
glad that I
degree in
got,
is your current degree in science? What was your degree
oh,
in?
no, no, no. Mine's in religious studies. I'm technically Reverend Johnnie Jae, but I'm a heathen. So, Native people, we're not these stereotypes. Like, we're not primitive people. We never were. We were always innovators. We were always teachers, scientists, mathematicians. And we have people who are doing these now that are achieving such great things. And, we have our own heroes. We have Deb Holland and Sharice David, who are the first Native women in Congress. And they're doing such amazing work for Indian country. We have Aaron Yazzie, we have Aaron Spice, and, we have so many other natives, Crystal Echohawk even, who are doing such amazing things for Indian country. And I wish we just could blast them all over like the mainstream media platforms, because I think once people would get to see the natives who are doing such wonderful things for our community, and not just for us, but like for the entire world,
Right.
it's, I think it would really help open them up, like, oh, natives are still here. Like, we actually still have native people, and this is what they're doing. Like, they're not just this poverty porn that they're inundated with, where it just shows native people as defeated or drunken people. They can show us that we're actually starting to thrive. Like, we have very strong communities, and there's so much beauty, even within the sorrow and the pain and the
Mhm.
devastation that we have. There's so much beauty that is still in our communities, and so much love.
I think it's important to get to know the community on a broader level, but I think it's just as important to get to know you on a personal level, which is bringing me to Big Dog, Little Dog, a rapid fire. This is the part of the show where I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I'm just going to reel them off super quickly. You have to answer them as quickly as you can without giving it much thought. I am judging you,
Uh-oh.
timing you internally. And so the goal is to get an A+, of course, always. But
Okay.
okay, are you down to play?
Okay, I am ready.
Okay, here we go. What is the most important lesson you've learned during COVID?
Community is everything.
Okay.
That is the most important thing, because, we don't see it a lot before COVID. But, now we have mutual aid efforts. We have so many communities that are coming together to make sure everybody has what they need during this time. And you just learn community is everything. We still have community. And
Okay.
I think that's the most important thing I've learned.
Okay. If I asked 10-year-old Johnnie what you want to be when you grow up, what would have been your answer?
Julia Roberts, Pretty Woman. My mom still teases me about that because I thought she was so pretty and I wanted to be a hooker. So I didn't know what it was, but so I still get terrorized about that. But
Okay. Dog person or cat person?
cat person.
Okay. You've got 24 hours to live. What 3 things do you have to do before it's a wrap?
Oh, geez. 1, kick Trump right in the baby maker. 2, what would be the second thing? I think it would have to be a mocha milkshake from Big Boy.
Okay.
Because it's the most amazing thing I've had so far. And I don't know if that's just because COVID, messed with everything. It was amazing. And I think the third thing would be to make myself president.
Nice. Most important quality in a business partner?
Honesty.
Yep.
I think that's the key, just honesty. And because partnerships just depend on being able to if you're not able to be honest with each other, then just, problems arise. You get resentment or you feel like you're not being heard, so I think it's just important to be honest.
You are from Oklahoma originally. What is your favorite thing about Oklahoma?
The food. I miss the food. I miss having Indian tacos available. I miss having corn soup and fry bread. I miss having, I know this sounds so weird, but I miss having squirrel for ceremonies.
Wait, hold on. Did you say squirrel?
Yes.
Okay.
But there's a lot of things like native foods. I don't really have access to a lot of them out here in California. And I think that's one of the things I miss about Oklahoma the most is just being connected to my communities through food.
What is your least favorite thing about Los Angeles?
People. We're just so crowded. There's just and I think that's what makes COVID so difficult right now too, is just we're so crowded here in LA that you can't really escape each other. Social distancing is the hardest thing to do.
And finally, what most inspires you?
I think what most inspires me is our youth. We as adults, we tend to just see the bad in everything or just feel the impact of everything that's going on.
Right.
But our youth, they see it and they experience it very differently. So while we're hurting and we're dealing with the hurt, our youth are hitting back with hope.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I see that work all the time in our youth, and I'm just amazed because I'm thinking, wow, when I was that age, I was still playing dolls, and now you have kids who are 10 that are leading climate change movements and doing such amazing, phenomenal work to change the world. And I think that's what inspires me the most, because it kind of reminds me that that's why we do what we do, because it's never for us, but our future generations. And they're already stepping up. So whenever I feel down, I always think, okay, victory is already ours because look at what our youth are doing.
That was
We've done
good.
a good job.
That was, listen, you passed with flying colors. That was good. Before I let you go, admittedly, I hesitate to even ask this next question because I, as a Black woman, fully understand how it feels when someone looks to me to be their one-stop shop for all things Black. But at the same time, though, I do believe that much of our power lies in the fact that we can help dictate our narrative by guiding people who don't look like us towards information so that they better understand us. So with that being said, what should non-natives be reading? What should we be watching? What should we be listening to better understand how critical Indigenous people are and have always been to our country?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, right now there is a couple of documentaries, and I would love for everyone to be able to watch them. One is called More Than a Word, which does address the movement to change the name, and it is incredible interviews from people who have been monumental in the fight to change the name. Suzanne Harjo, Amanda Blackhorse, Tara Huska, um, and I hate to say it, but even I'm in there.
Plug
And then,
yourself. It's okay. Shamelessly plug
but then
yourself.
there's also Forgetting Winnetou, Loving in the Wrong Way, which addresses Native stereotypes in other countries, in mainly Germany, but it kind of addresses the impact that it has on a global scale and how they view Native people. But I think they're two phenomenal documentaries that people should watch. Um, and then also, I think a lot of people should know about the Sovereign Bodies Institute, which is a phenomenal organization that deals with the murdered and missing Indigenous women. And there's also a group out of, I believe, Portland, maybe Seattle, Washington, somewhere. But they're Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women USA, but they also do an incredible amount of work on the issue to bring awareness to what's going on here in the US that doesn't get talked about and is kind of like the dirty little secret right now. But as far as movies, check out Sterling Harjo. He's one of our most amazing filmmakers. And then there's also Mark Williams. He has the Native American Paranormal Project, which if you're interested in ghost hunting and you want to see how natives do this, perfect thing to watch. As far as books, oh my gosh, there's so many. Alicia Elliott is a First Nations writer, and she has a book out, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground. It's an amazing book if you deal with mental health issues. I am bipolar, so reading that book, I was like, oh wow, like all these stories, the experiences really resonated with me, and I was like, oh my gosh. The same with Therese Milhaud's Heartberries, which is another phenomenal book. And then there's also a book, it's a graphic novel, but it's called 150 Years Retold. So it's a reimagining of our histories. And it's one of the most amazing graphic novels that I've read in, I'd say probably like the last 2 or 3 years, just because it kind of like shows you a glimpse into how Native people imagine our futures, but also how we also reimagine our past.
Do you worry that the traditions with Native people being 2% of the American population, do you worry that your traditions and your heritage will, as time passes, get lost and be ultimately forgotten?
That's not really a worry for me, just because we've had over 500 years of going through, I guess you would say, the maximum efforts of this entire world to eliminate Native people, to eliminate our languages, our histories, our cultures, and yet we're still here. And, we have a strong movement right now of revitalization, people who are bringing back traditions that were lost, revitalizing languages that were considered extinct. And I see that the work that people are doing right now to ensure that it doesn't fade away. So I'm not really concerned about it on like as something that's going to just fade away. But, there is a real fear right now how we're going to be impacted by COVID because, it does impact our elders, and our elders are our knowledge keepers. And we've lost so many people already, people who, even young people who have been monumental in language revitalization programs, people who were amazing role models for our Native youth. You know, we've lost so many people, and it's such a hard thing for me to like deal with, but you know, like I'm constantly thinking like, once this is over, what's going to be left and who's going
Mm-hmm.
to be left? Because it's not just our community that's being hit hard, but you know, I know other communities, you know, they're losing their leaders, they're losing their youth, their, you know, their knowledge keepers as well. And you know, I look at just everything that's going on, and I have that thought, like, what's going to be left? Like, who's going to be left to carry this on? And how is that going to impact the efforts that we have right now to make sure that, you know, our languages aren't lost, our traditions aren't lost? And I think the one good thing about it, though, is that Native people were always evolving. Like, our cultures were never stagnant, our languages were never stagnant. And so, you know, as Native people, you know, we're not necessarily trying to hold on to what we were, but
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out who we are now and who we're going to be in the future, which leaves a lot of room for us to evolve, like for our traditions to evolve, to take different forms, for our languages to become more than what they are now. So that there's a lot of hope in that too. So it's not just doom and gloom.
And I'm happy to hear that, because even prepping for our conversation, there was so much history that I learned in the few days leading up to today. I was telling you earlier that I even learned that Choctaw natives had Black slaves. And I
Hmm.
thought to myself, that's a part of Native American history that I didn't know. And I said, okay, so now I have to fight Johnnie Jae.
Yeah.
Now we got to
No,
fight. But there's such a wide history. There's so much to
oh yeah.
know. There's so
And
much to
it's,
know.
yeah, there is. And it, you know, it kind of goes back to, you know, there's a lot of division, a lot of historical risk between so many communities, but especially the Black and Native community. And I always see those rifts as having been deliberately engineered,
Hmm.
because I think the most powerful thing that could happen for us to really change the US for the better, would be that moment when Native and Black people come together,
Hmm.
because the sins of this country began with us. And to me, it must end with us. So if you're not centering Indigenous and Black voices in justice movements, then you're not working towards justice, because it has to start with us. We have to be the ones to lead the discussions on what justice is going to look like on stolen lands and in a country that was built on slave labor. You know, it's us. We have to be able to dictate those conversations and to really lead the movements to envision how we move forward from that. Because, you know, so many people just want us to get over it and pretend that it doesn't matter, but it does. Because we have our history, like especially for Native and Black people, our histories are so entangled, and anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity are basically one and the same, because we're all Indigenous people. And so, you know, it's a conversation that I'm glad we're starting to have. And I see that work starting to happen, but I keep just waiting for that day when we are just so unified that we just strike that final blow.
Mhm.
And, you know, it's like, okay, the new day is here. This is what's going to happen.
You have such a great platform, and especially on Twitter, which is how I first came across you, when you were educating the masses on Twitter, when a Native American man was dancing in South Dakota, and a journalist, a photographic journalist out of Sioux Falls, I believe, wrote as a journalist, "Oh, this man just started dancing in the street," and then you very thoughtfully corrected her, and the tweet went viral. So talk a little bit about that. Then I promise you I'll let you go, because I think this is super important to have a voice like you giving context to what an average person has no idea about.
Oh yeah, the video, you know, it was kind of funny to me. I was like, she has no idea what's going on, and nobody around her is really explaining it to her because she's not Native either. So, you know, it's, I was just like, wow, people need to know what's going on here, because otherwise it's just this man just started dancing in the street. And people were commenting on her video and, you know, like, oh, he's blessing him. And, you know, kind of going with this whole stereotypical natives paint with all the colors of the wind, peaceful kind of spiritual thing. And I was just like, oh no. I was like, we need to tell people what's happening. I was like, he's counting coup. And counting coup for a lot of the Plains natives was one of the greatest honors. And it was being able to get close enough to touch your enemy or to steal something from them, to take something from them without causing them harm or death. Like that was the greatest honor in war. It wasn't how many people you killed or, how many scars you bore. It was how close you could get to the enemy, how close you could get and show him mercy, to just touch him, to just take something instead of taking his life. And for the other person, it was shame because your enemy let you live. And, you saw this man dancing and you could hear them singing. And then he got close. He was getting close to the cop. And there was a moment when he tapped the officer on the leg and the officer kind of jumped a little. And, that's when the lady said, "That's a blessing." And I was laughing. I was like, oh no, he just struck a defeating blow. He was just defeating the officer right then and there. And, I really wanted to share that because there was so much power in that and so much that people don't understand about Native people, that we're not savages, we're not cruel people. And when you hear about the injustices we face, a lot of people come back, well, natives were always killing each other. Natives were always doing this. They were doing that, as if it justifies genocide.
Right.
And, I wanted to explain that because we had a very different outlook on war. Counting coup, that was the highest honor that you could achieve. For Choctaw people, we didn't have, our warfare became a game, and it's called stickball. And it was played between villages to settle disputes. And sometimes it was played between villages. And I love hearing the stickball stories because I was always like, women don't play stickball, and they were like, no, women had a more important role. And I was like, well, what's that role? And they were like, well, they lined the playing field. So sometimes this could be miles between villages that they would play stickball, and the women would line up, set up camp, and they would make sure that they were feeding and making sure they had water, because you played the whole time. Like there wasn't a timeout or a thing. But the most important job that they had was to keep the players in line. So if they didn't think that you were playing as hard as you could or the best you could, they would beat you with sticks.
Oh,
So
geez.
I was like, go women.
Damn,
but that was
damn coached.
but like our warfare was very different. So I wanted to show people like the idea that they're taught about Native warfare. It's not the way that it makes it seem in history, but it was very nuanced, very different. We didn't look to really kill or take victory. Some tribes did, but it wasn't like we were just out here just killing each other for fun.
Yeah.
We had other ways to deal with conflict because for Native people it's always about balance, maintaining that balance between life and death, and just making sure that we're maintaining balance, and like not just with each other but like with the universe at large.
Before I let you go, Johnnie, plug yourself. Where can we find you, your projects, your social media? How can we keep up with what you're doing?
Well, Twitter right now is my main platform. It's where I'm at all the time. I'm addicted. So you can find me on Twitter at Johnnie Jae, JohnnieJae. And you can also follow A Tribe Called Geek there as well. And same thing, Facebook, Instagram, Tribe Called Geek and Johnnie Jae. I don't really keep up with Instagram. I really should, but with COVID, it's like no opportunity to really take cool pictures anywhere.
Tell me about it, girl. If I pull out one more old picture from 2 years ago, I'm going to not be happy with myself. Jeez.
Right. And I was like, and there's only so many selfies you could take. So,
Right.
Instagram's been kind of a bust with COVID, but, Twitter and Facebook, I'm still keeping up everything there.
Okay. Listen, I give you, not that you need my endorsement, but you are brilliant, bright, thoughtful in everything that I've seen that you have posted, and not only giving context to Native American issues, but just to social issues in general. So trust me, guys, she is an amazing follow. And I hope that you will come back and chat with me later on, because we have so much more to cover. Again, completely humbled and honored to be in your presence today, Johnnie Jae, on this week's Big Dog, Little Dog.